Thank you, Timothée. Bold ideas to feed our minds and to carry on with that theme of feeding our minds, of bringing different perspectives into the tent. We're going to be joined in a moment by two other leaders who are approaching this question of rethinking our systems from different vantage points. You may have heard some of the other leaders already here at ChangeNOW sharing those ideas. The Earth for All initiative, Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, who was here on Monday, the Donut Economics Lab, many, many others. So we're with a community of people who are looking to push the boundaries, and I hope you can learn more from our two speakers on that topic now. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome to the stage Maria Syed, research lead at the Interactive Media Foundation, economics consultant, and the Feminist Advocacy Coalition based in Berlin, but originally from Pakistan, and Michel Scholte, a social entrepreneur dedicated to building a more equitable future, co-founder and executive director of the Impact Institute and True Price, joining us from Amsterdam. Please give them a round of applause. Welcome. Thank you for being here. So let's start to hear a bit from you both about the perspective that you're coming from. I'd love you to share briefly, in 60 to 90 seconds, if you can, how you are each working to rethink our economic system. And maybe you want to touch upon how you're considering planetary and social boundaries in that work. Maria, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Ella, for that question. I think I would say that Audre Lorde, I'm sure most of you would know, her words actually echo what I would like to say, is that the master's tools will never destroy the master's house. And I think with that thought in mind, I am working with and working as someone who is trying to dismantle the structures within the society, nothing coming out of the blue, but from the feminist economics lens, having that decolonial view, but also coming from the human rights principles at the core. And I think that is something which makes my work as a researcher much more exciting when it comes to the applicability and questioning what the status quo lies within the global macroeconomic structures or the frameworks that we are dealing with right now. And on the other hand, trying to bridge different fields that we all come from, being advocacy, media, and academia. I mean, three of them, different silos, and everyone being skeptical about what each one of us are doing.
Thanks, Maria. We'll come back to some more of the projects you're working on in a moment. Michel, what about you? What perspective are you coming from?
Well, I'm a social entrepreneur. Many of my friendpreneurs actually face bankruptcy because they have a business. For example, Lightyear, who started a solar electric vehicle, and they filed for bankruptcy because the fossil fuel alternatives were much cheaper and more competitive in the market. There's many, and way too many examples of companies and entrepreneurs, but also products and services with an impact ambition that are more expensive because exploitation and extraction is cheaper than the sustainable alternative. And therefore, we started over a decade ago with True Price. And True Price is the market price plus the social and environmental cost in the whole value chain of a product. Think, for example, of the cost for pollution and how much would it cost to clean water, soil, and air, or how much would it cost to pay a living wage? We started this over a decade ago. We're now 100 people strong, working all over the world. And we have a supermarket in Amsterdam. We have 40 more purchase points added to the movement this year. And ultimately, we provide transparency and voluntary payment of true prices. And remarkably so, we see that there's lots of uptake, and well, there's obviously lots of things to talk about.
Thanks, Michel. I think building on what we've heard just with Timothée's keynote and your introduction, I wanted to bring in a concept that a colleague of mine shared with me earlier this week, which is this two loops model from an institute called the Bakana Institute. And they talk about how we need to transition away from the dominant business as usual economy into the emergent new economy and they talk about it as hospicing the old economy, composting it, winding it down, and they use the term midwifing, which is interesting. Midwifing, rebirthing, investing in this new economy, and crucially that both that hospicing and midwifing is needed. So I think as a context for how we talk now, I'd love to use that as one of the ideas. If we start with the hospicing of the old economy, I'd love you both to share where would you start? What would be the 3 first parts of the existing economy that you would want to wind down? And Michel, maybe we can start with you.
Well, first of all, you need to do it yourselves, building a bottom-up movement. We shouldn't rely on policy, on politics. We should just be entrepreneurs and consumers sufficiently responsible to account for your own pollution. And I don't think it's fair to, if you have the ability to pay for your environment and social costs, that you say, oh, I'm just a small actor. If you have the ability, you pay for your bills to nature or your bills to those who are suffering in value chains. So I think it really is important to also fix on your own role and your own ability. And obviously also there's a very big systemic problem here, and that is multifaceted, but one key institution is the accounting system. Currently, the accounting system does not incorporate, for example, environmental costs. We have some regulatory shifts in Europe, but it's not really more than transparency. It's not really transformation. If you, and that's just one illustration, if you would pay $100 per ton of carbon, then the largest polluter and largest oil company and most profitable oil company in the world, Saudi Aramco, would, instead of making $151 billion in profit, would make approximately $30 billion of loss. That's how important it is what you account for and what you do not account for, and what you pay for and what not. If that incentive would be there from an accounting mandatory perspective, then there would be a huge shift towards a more or a less fossil economy. That's just to illustrate how important the accounting system is, but this requires much more than just the accounting system, obviously.
So you have 3 things: individual action, accounting system. Is there one more that you want to add into the mix?
Oh, yeah, fiscal system, obviously. There's lots of possibilities. I recently saw in France the proposal from the coalition to pay a max of 10 euros for ultra-fast fashion, additional, to basically, compensate for the environmental pollution. We see in many European countries that the fashion market is flooded by exploitative and pollutive fashion from Chinese web shops. That's extremely, insane. And therefore, it's good that you have these kind of, temporary fixes through fiscal incentives to enhance these prices and to stock up some money to clean the environment. But these are temporal solutions. Ultimately, we really need to attack this from, the core of it, and that is, for example, the accounting system and education, and ensuring that we all have a mindset that we shouldn't just pollute or extract or exploit without paying for those externalities.
Thanks. Maria, what about you? What are the 3 parts of the existing system you would start with winding down?
Yeah, I think, so might take big names or like big dropouts of the terms. Colonization, something which is so crucial when it comes to the macroeconomic policies, the whole economics and the structures that have been built around the multilateral organizations being International Monetary Fund and World Bank, and the schemes that they are coming with when it comes to the austerity measures that have regressive taxation imposition in our global south countries or the developing islands, which is just extracting more money at the expense of the ecological and social well-being. So number 1 is really trying to go into the depth of economics as it in itself, like decolonizing it and coming up with the root cause of what's there at the bottom of this whole vicious debt trap that is there to make our countries much more dependent on it. Second of all is, again, patriarchy. But this is not something which is like just a term there. It's to recognize the care work that most of the population, 49% of the women, is doing most of the time. And our research has been conducted in all the countries, be it global north, be it global south, the global migration chains that includes most of the Latin American women coming to the global north countries and doing that paid work so that the active labor force participation within the developed countries could actually boost. And this is something that's like creating much more of the divide between the global north and global south that we actually, of course, don't want. But this is something that comes with redistribution and reallocation of what needs to be done within the labor market and having those labor rights. So second of all will be that. And third would be more of like a collaborative approach, which means that all of the fields, be it from the legal principles aspects, be it from the economics part, be it from the media, and advocacy needs to come together. And this is why I see this space to be one of those spaces where we could find people and make those coalitions so that we have the civic action and something that could move, that could lobby. If we could have OPEC as a lobby group, we could also have something stronger than that to keep pushing these policies.
Thank you. So we have a 25-minute fireside chat in total. We are 10 minutes in, and we've dismantled, well, we've started to wind down the current system. Now we're going to move into, and I recognize we're jumping quickly into building that new system. And so I'd love to hear you help us bring that new system to life. What are some of the characteristics of an economic system that take into account planetary and social boundaries? What does that system value, and what will that system, who and what will that system benefit? Michel, I'll start with you again.
Yeah, so ultimately, every price you see around you will then have a true price. I don't think it's a sufficient condition. I wouldn't dare to enter the ring with Timothy on being the answer, the silver bullet, but it's definitely the necessary condition. Without true prices, there's no sustainability. Now, obviously, you need to be clear on what you mean with true. And here, what we did was we took the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was the response to the atrocities of the Second World War, where the world gathered, led by Eleanor Roosevelt, and stipulated what is the preconditions for a life in dignity. And from that, in the decades that followed, there were ILO conventions, amongst others the Convention Against Enslavement, the conventions against exploitative labor, but also on the communities, the conferences of parties on climate, on biodiversity. And these are the most daring and also, I would say, the least controversial norms, universal norms that we have in the world with regards to what we consider a life in dignity. And the nice thing is that many countries that kind of set the bandwidth for markets have ratified those norms. And therefore, you can argue that, and that is also in the 2011 ratified Convention for Human Rights, done in the Ruggie Principles. So the UNGP, the United Nations Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, basically adopted the idea that there is this duty to respect for companies, even if states don't protect human rights. Now, what true pricing does is basically we extend that logic and say, what's then the duty to pay? And now we don't say that there's this duty to pay for every individual per se or every company per se, but there is a open bill to be paid by value chains. And then basically what we say is those who are able to pay, they should pay it. And then ultimately value chain players need to puzzle out who does what and how. So that is what we have designed with true pricing. And I hope what we can bring to the table is a very granular implication. If you protect and respect human rights, and what is then the implication for market players in transactions as a consumer, as an entrepreneur, to address the infringement, the tragic infringements of human rights?
Maria, we've heard from Michel around true pricing, how that brings a greater focus on what dignity in life is like, paying that through the value chain? What are some other characteristics of the new system we're trying to get to? What does that look like for individuals and communities?
How much time do I have?
2 minutes.
Okay. So I think I will try to keep it short. Two approaches that I would really like to see as part of the policy mechanism, and I'm saying policy mechanism, which means that it's something that we are working as communities, as individuals, with really strong movements around the globe to make it part, to be there at the table with those people at the power who are making these decisions. And the first of all is about the fair and equitable fiscal arrangements between, again, with the multilateral organizations imposing on the global south countries or the developing islands. And I see debt to be as such a strong mechanism and tool which is being used. Again, it's something that should be used for the social and the ecological well-being of the social and planetary boundaries. But it's being used as a tool to retain the power and hegemony within the nations and within the countries and across the globe. So I think the first thing that needs to be changed is, again, the way that the taxation is working, and that trickles down to most of the impact on women and children and the marginalized communities. The prime examples being Pakistan, highly indebted, has to spend 4 times more on paying the debt repayments than it has to on social expenditure, being on education and health. And then you have Fiji as another example, highly climate vulnerable country, and again, being in high distress. So I think these are like one of the important mechanisms on the global level, and on the other hand, the legal principles that could be changed. And I think currently I'm working on a climate justice campaign, the Not Just Celsius one, which is linked to the International Court of Justice advisory opinion, led by the youth movement of PICFCC and the World Youth for Climate Justice.
And PICC is
the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change. And they had taken this climate justice case to the court, holding accountable the big polluters and the corporations, as well as asking for intergeneration equity. And this is supposed to be historic in terms of the advisory opinion that is likely to come out later in the year, but a lot of states have already submitted. And I think this is something where we see collaboration, where we see youth movements, where we see civic action really going into the policy-making paradigm. So I think we have examples, and we just have to follow them in order to make them work, but be persistent about it.
How do you continue to be persistent in your work? How do you continue to have the resilience to be persistent? A more personal question, but I can see the passion in your in your answers.
I mean, if Elon Musk can still be persistent on going to SpaceX, like Mars, putting another planet on fire and not thinking about planet Earth, then I think all of us, when we see planet Earth being on fire and us being one of the victims of it, I think the motivation can come, it can kick in from that perspective.
Michel, you've talked about the true price approach and the tool that you see pricing as to help affect knock-on effect changes through the system. What are some other examples that you see of progress towards achieving that system today? Are there any examples or other tools that you think need to help create that domino effect?
Sure. I mean, the CSRD is a promising development, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, as it's called at EU level. It's a very promising concept where, for the first time in history of financial markets, the social, environmental, and governance issues are now mandatory, part of the financial reports of approximately 45,000 companies in Europe in the coming 5 years or so. That's extremely exciting. And also that there's this mandatory reporting requirement for companies outside of the EU, which have more than 150 euros of revenue from 2028 onwards. That's very promising because then there will be transparency. So the information is on the table with regards to scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, on climate and other things. However, there's one catch. Nothing of the actual disclosures is mandatory. So it's all dependent on what is considered material. It's all dependent on what stakeholders are experiencing as material, what the investors are experiencing as material. And therefore, it's important that we keep a dialogue with these corporations and ensure that actually the voices of the people who are infringed upon their rights, whether it's future generations through climate change or deprived communities suffering from the negative impacts, or whether it's worker-related rights, inadequate wages, for example. We need to make sure that there's a voice of those who are kind of in a, well, call it a vulnerable position, that they are somehow ensuring that it is considered material. Because if it's not considered material, those companies won't actually report on it. And you may think, well, will companies get away with it? Obviously, companies get away with it. In fact, there's a large bank in Spain. They have 140 employees, and they considered their own workforce impact not material, which was obviously very strange if you have so many workers. So it's really important that we max out on the opportunity of this and ensure that this actually will be used to also, well, drive the change that is needed through the accounting system.
That bank is 140 or 140,000?
140,000, sorry. Yeah.
and I guess a follow-up question on how do you make sure that the voice and perspective of the communities that are most impacted is heard within a company? Do you have any recommendations for how an organization might start doing that if they have never done it for the first time?
Well, I believe in impact literacy. I think we are financially, well, we consider ourselves very good at finance, but it's actually very poor. We don't really know the protocols and the arbitrariness of some of the parts of those protocols, of what we consider valuable and what not, how we value land, how we value intangible assets. It's really important to make sure that we have literacy of finance, but also beyond that, impact literacy. And that is, are we actually able to understand that, companies' operations affect local communities, the economic or cohesion of a small shopping area and the housing prices, it's all interrelated. And we need to make sure that we have a much stronger understanding and that we teach each other the language of impact. That all starts at high schools or primary schools and education. This whole package of the CSRD is thrown at companies, but there's no real capacity building at ministries of education in Europe. Or there's no civil society, strong civil society package linked to this, so that we, or labor unions or other entities, so that they also know what their rights are, what the framework is that they can use to keep companies accountable. So really, I think it's important that we, well, I mean, all of you, we teach ourselves the details of this regulation package, the ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standard. Just Google it, get into the details, and then make sure that you keep you buy your stuff from companies, keep them accountable for being extremely transparent and also living up to, well, respecting and living up to human rights.
Thanks, Michel. Time is flying. I wanted to ask you, Maria, a question around the different intervention points you see within this enormous system. You've already talked about the fiscal and the legal elements of that. Is there anything else you'd want to add? Where else do you see as key levers for change in this vast system?
Yeah, so I think what could be doable within the structures or dismantling the structures that we have, the first important point of inception could be, like Michel said, the human rights principles element. The Paris Agreement couldn't have been established or couldn't have taken that, big leap of faith if the common but differentiated responsibilities were not added on the table, which means that the historical emissions by the developed countries should be accountable in order to serve what damage it has done beyond the borders and reaching out to the global south countries. And then you have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights Principles, which is a key element in all structures that we see, be it in economics, be it in like the financial sector, or be it in the climate sector. It's all part of it. So I think the execution needs to be there, and the policies have to be gender sensitive, and they have to be care sensitive, because the gendered lens is not only identifying the binary gender roles. It's much more than that. It's highlighting the intersectionality that exists within the race, income, class, ethnicity, and this is likely to impact most of the immigrant communities within like the regions. And we could see how climate disasters or climate catastrophes are leading to displacements, extractivism, forceful evictions of the indigenous communities, and they have to go to other places. So I mean, these policies are kind of like intertwined. So we need to stop the eco-genocide, most importantly, that is taking place. So I think what's important is to realize that these problems, they are complicated and complex until and unless they're not there on the table. Once they're there, they're intertwined. So as a researcher, I believe that it's not only just trying to figure out in the narrow tunnel of seeing that, oh, this is a problem that we need to approach from one lens. It's everything coming together, and now with the climate crisis, it's becoming much more evident. And this is why we need more intersectionality lens to it. And I couldn't much more emphasize on that. And this is why most of the policy framework that I'm also doing is coming from that lens and trying to disrupt the structures that we have. And I think advocacy and activism goes with it, because without it, you're not reaching top-down, you're not leading the top-down approach. So that's an important part of it.
So speaking about advocacy and activism and influence, and to close our panel discussion now, I wanted to ask you both for one final comment, if you could influence one person or group with your ideas, who would they be, and what would be the one first step you would want them to take?
Maria first. Just kidding.
I think, Michel, you should go.
Whoa. No, I would go for the accounting, IFRS, the International Financial Sustainability... the Standards Board, International Financial Standards Board in Brussels. I would ask them, obviously, to incorporate all the social and environmental costs in a smart way, whether it's accounting for them in the P&L or on the balance sheet, activating lots of the costs so that companies have a financial incentive, that investors have a financial incentive to push a more sustainable economy. If we don't take that whole, call it, framework into account for this transition, we will have decades of disappointment, more than we have so far. So that would be my kind of
one
request.
clear ask. Maria, very quickly.
So I think I would rather approach the people with the wealth inequality colonization mindset, and I think the first name that comes to my mind is, again, I have nothing against Elon Musk, but these people need to be held accountable, and the corporations need to be held accountable for that. And I think it's all about redistribution and reallocation of the resources we have the finances. We just need to reallocate and redistribute them in the right spaces, and that means giving it out to the climate frontline communities, giving it out to the marginalized communities, and that is going to make a difference.
Thank you so much. Maria, Michel, if you want to hear more about their work, recommendations of who to go to, podcasts, books, newsletters to read more about some of the ideas they've shared today, please go and find them after the session. We have to wrap up, unfortunately, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.